Knowledge is an interesting concept. If you think about it, it's pretty hard to pinpoint what it is. At a pretty high level, it is a collection of facts and their relationships. But what is it at a lower level? Does knowledge exist before we finally acquire it? Or does it only become real when we put it into words, ready to be put to use after we have imbued words with meaning? I actually thought about this years ago and came to the conclusion that creating new knowledge is really about language. Understanding something new in a way that produces knowledge is an iterative process in which we progressively coin or repurpose words and imbue them with meaning we only progressively understand. Starting from a lower level, we can work ourselves up until we have a collection of words with new meanings that in their relationships constitute a new concept. I discovered years later that this is actually very close to one of the most important concepts in Christianity, namely the Logos. In Genesis, God speaks things into existence. Let there be light, and there was light. Things are literally spoken into existence. This is the Logos in action. The philosophical branch that deals with knowledge, its origin, nature, and scope is called Epistemology. So, what is the West's epistemological framework? In this video, we'll explore how the West answered this question in the past and how we answer it today, as exemplified by our reaction to the COVID pandemic. Let's look at how things were when Christianity and religion were the framework we used to understand the world. If we look at the story of Genesis again, you might have noticed that the book goes one step further than I did. I only claimed that imbuing new words with meaning constitutes knowledge, while the ancients went one step further and claimed that imbuing words with meaning constituted reality itself. This suggests that reality is conceptualized as something that doesn't really have an independent existence from the observer. The material world used to receive very little consideration compared to what we're used to today. But this is very natural if you think about it. For thousands of years, people in search of a way to improve their existence focused on improving their internal and social lives, because that was indeed the most powerful method at their disposal. Indeed, science and technology were not sufficiently developed. Only gradually did people realize that we can improve our life also by influencing the material world around us. The material universe was at best considered cyclical and most of the time simply static. The notion of continuous progress did not play a big role in ancient cultures at all. So, how was knowledge about internal and social reality stored so it could be passed on and improved upon? In stories and myths. Religion is the culmination of this process. Thus, the following conception of reality and what it means to understand emerges. First of all, there's the primacy of internal and social reality. Second, the way we understand is through stories. Third, the most powerful stories are universal, namely, they cover life holistically rather than addressing only one particular topic. Okay, so now we've seen the ancient perspective, and now let's think about the modern world's relationship with knowledge. One word probably comes to mind: scientific. The huge success of science and technology in improving our lives has meant that we tend to look at the external, material reality as the most important domain of existence. Moreover, here's an interesting thought. Scientific theories choose a topic, for instance, let's say electricity, and craft a model describing that subsection of reality in a way that is independent from, let's say, gravitation. This is not to say that gravitation is not an important part of external reality. In fact, it is its own branch of physics. But it can be usefully neglected to obtain a practical theory of electromagnetism that will work just fine in all but the most edgy of edge cases. What am I saying with this? That the modern epistemological mindset sees reality as a collection of self-contained units of knowledge rather than one cohesive whole. Society actually has come to mimic this setup, if you think about it, in the way we're organized. Many independent, specialized workers work in a series of sequential and independent steps to create a product. But the reality is that without someone with a vision to conceptualize the product as a whole, the enterprise pretty soon loses its way and fails. I think the same problem undermines our current collective epistemological mindset. Finally, we also tend to mistake scientific theories with reality itself, rather than seeing them as the formal analogies they are. This is always somewhat baffling to me. At the latest, when your professor tells you that a photon behaves as a particle in some cases and as a wave in others, you should go, okay, this stuff here is more of a tool to predict reality by analogy rather than something with its own independent existence. So here's the modern epistemological mindset. First of all, there's the primacy of external reality. Second, we understand or even identify reality with formal language systems, aka models and theories. And number three, reality is a collection of loosely coupled material systems. We focus on the one that is currently of interest. So, how does this relate to COVID, you might ask? Well, I believe that the way we as people dealt with a pandemic really beautifully shows how we understand reality and relate to it in the modern West. It's early 2020. In the sea of compartmentalized domains of knowledge, a new problem emerges: COVID. The seeming scientificity of the clinical reality of COVID prompted us to treat it like we treat electrodynamics, in isolation rather than holistically. The other areas were not only neglected, they were simply assumed away in this framework. They simply were not considered as potentially relevant. In science, this is justified with the idea that other factors are negligible. Here, if any justification is offered at all, it is that it would be too complex to factor in social, economic, and moral factors. But this is only because the assumed platform of analysis should be the scientific one rather than the holistic framework of morality. Of course, science maintains a very important role, but it dominates at a lower level of analysis. Trying to analyze the trade-off between COVID restrictions, the economy, and the psychological well-being of people is impossible in a quantitative scientific framework. But it would have been completely doable and should have been done in a moral framework. The problem would have gone from being one of quantities to one of categories. The whole problem is compounded with the religious righteousness associated with confusing the model, or in this case, data presented selectively and without context, with reality itself. Of course, this whole enterprise only brands itself as scientific. In science, we have reasonable grounds to believe gravitation is negligible in the context of electrodynamics, at least under normal conditions. On the other hand, nobody would have had the guts to claim that COVID restrictions had no impact on non-clinical domains. Moreover, when it gets tricky to understand whether your assumptions are correct, you just run experiments to test that the hypothesis stands. While in the clinical domain, doing real experimentation to check reproducibility often runs into ethical concerns. To summarize, we tend to apply the scientific method to domains where it does not and cannot apply. We tend to analyze problems only in the domain of material reality, ignoring higher levels of analysis. And this just leads to projecting scientific legitimacy onto a distorted parody of itself that is too narrow, static, and self-righteous.